Hello, Rarely Friends! Today I have a little bit of a casual video for you. I want to talk about a couple of things, all of which is sprung from one question a person sent me. So, before I go anywhere, what is today's subject? Today we're going to be talking about how to keep plot twists hidden from your reader. I have a couple of tips for that, and before we go anywhere, allow me to give you the formal disclaimer, as always, that the following is merely just my advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Don't take it as gospel, instead take it as the ramblings of a person with a silly face like this one. So what is the question that I got recently? I got this question not so long ago, and of course I answered it, but it kept lingering in the back of my mind, and it felt like a really quick question for a video, and I didn't want to just have like a single question for today's video. And I wanted to expand on it, and I found that a couple of points kept coming out of that, kind of like blossoming out of this question. And the question was, of course, hey Max, and this is a really simple question, by the way. The question was like, hey Max, in the story that I'm writing, I have to keep my character's name secret because it is a plot twist related thing later on. How would I go about addressing my character without calling them by their name? Now, of course, the answer to that is actually pretty darn simple. Like, what would I do? Well, I either call them by a nickname or a title, such as the Swordsman or Strider. Yes, if you think about it, like a Strider, aka Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings, that's actually like a prime example of what to do. Just call them by a nickname, and and keep addressing them as that nickname, so when the time comes for them to reveal themselves as the real person, it becomes a little bit of a twist, because you did not see that coming. Yeah, so that is the answer to that question. It's as simple as that. Call them something else. You can keep the name secret, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And springing from there, I began thinking about other ways to keep things secret from the reader, and I kept coming back to one point in particular. And this came from a balance, because you want the plot twist to be a surprise, of course you do. And up to an extent, you want the people who are really paying attention to kind of see the crumb trail. You want them to see the clues that you have left behind. You want them to be able to guess, but not everyone to be able to guess. I understand there's a balance there. And you're doing this sort of like juggling trick, and you want to be able to surprise most people, but also give those who are paying attention a little bit of a reward. And I kept thinking, what is the best way to go about doing things? And what is the best way that has worked for me in the past? Because ultimately, if it hasn't worked for me, why am I giving you this advice? And I realized that there was one thing in particular that I kept coming back to. And this is more applicable to third-person stories, but it also counts towards the next piece of advice. But the advice is this. In order to keep a plot twist secret, it's not about lying to the reader, but rather not telling them the truth. And I realized that the person in charge of this, or in charge of not spilling the beans, happens to be the narrator. That's right, the one tip that has worked for me in the past is having the narrator not make absolute claims about whatever happened in the story that I'm trying to build up towards. Like, if a character is going to be coming back, like, it's revealed that they actually were not dead, I try to have the narrator not make an absolute statement as though, this character is here, dead, absolutely dead, unquestionably dead. Why? Because having this fact be undone later on in third-person narration feels as though it's cheating the reader, because whatever the narrator says in third-person narration feels ultimate, feels absolute, because clearly this narrator that is telling us a story would not lie to the reader, and if you do that, it kind of feels a little bit cheap, and it feels, at least in my history, that whenever the narrator clearly lied to me, I stopped trusting it right there and then. And that may not be something you want to have in your relationship with the reader. You want the reader to be able to be immersed and to not question what the narrator is telling them, but to be so immersed in the story that they're just accepting what is going on. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking, but Max, if the narrator doesn't make claims as to what is happening to set up the plot twist, how will I be able to set it up? Because you're literally telling me, have the narrator not talk about the plot twist. And this is, of course, one of my favorite things about drama, and the thing is this, the narrator doesn't have to talk about it. They don't have to talk about it. You know who should be talking about the setup? Your characters. You know why? Because your characters can be wrong. That's right, your characters can make mistakes. Your characters can make assumptions and act on those assumptions. Think of those pieces of literature you have read throughout your life. Things like Romeo and Juliet, where people just assume things. When people act without thinking, people act on their assumptions without thinking twice. Those things are drama. Those things are delicious for me. Those are the little nuggets of enjoyment that I get the most out of writing. So, in setting up a plot twist, I like to have the characters take the center stage. Have the characters act and make assumptions and act on those assumptions and lead the reader through what the characters are doing, because the characters can be wrong. And the characters are the vehicle through which you experience your story. Yes, the narrator is there to set up the stage and the background, but ultimately, it's about character. We're ultimately there for the people who are driving the story forward, who happen to be the characters, and they can be incredibly wrong. It's funny because I don't really see this as a tip rather than a practice. This is something that I find that a lot of authors do, and it's a really good storytelling technique. It's the idea of letting the narrator step aside and letting the characters take the center stage and let those characters direct the reader's attention and to show them what they are seeing, whether it is right or not. So, yeah, Max, yeah, okay, sure, all these tips are really cool if you're writing a third-person perspective story. What if my story is told from the first point of view? What if my story is told from a point of view of a character? What am I to do then if the narrator cannot be wrong? I actually think that I've already answered your question, because if you're telling the story from the first-person narration, your narrator happens to be a character, and characters can be wrong. I mean, if anything, I do feel that first-person narration stories have an easier time creating plot twists because it's a lot easier to be blindsided when you're stuck inside of someone's head. If you would like a sort of a video game analogy, it's kind of like playing a first-person perspective game where you cannot see whoever is behind you about to stab you in the back, as opposed to a third-person game where you can clearly pan the camera and see what is coming. A third-perspective sort of story gives you a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of distance, and that is why I think that the narrator should be very careful at never making an absolute statement regarding something that will be a plot twist later on. Of course, it should go without saying that I want to make it very clear that a lot of these things about worrying about what your narrator is saying and about particular character stuff is things that you should only worry about during the revision draft. I know that I say this all the time, and I may sound like a broken record, but I do absolutely mean it. You earn absolutely nothing by worrying about this during the first draft and slowing yourself down. Really, these are all things that you can fix and revise and make shiny and pretty later on. Ultimately, you want to get the story written. If you're in the middle of writing a story right now, get that story done, let it sit, and then worry about making it perfect and about making that plot twist, incredibly amazing and awesome and flashy. All of those things can wait. And as a little bit of a final note before I wrap everything up, I want to talk about the idea of characters making mistakes. Because I know that there's a little bit of a sentiment out there for the idea of making characters likable. And it's hard to like somebody when they make dumb mistakes. I have to stand from the point of view of storytelling, of theater, of drama, of opera, of characters making mistakes and choices that have consequences to them. I don't know about you, but these are the things that I read for. These are the things that I watch movies for and I play video games for. These delicious, nasty stories where characters make choices. And you cannot always make the right choice all the time. Sometimes you make tough choices, wrong choices, and you have to face the consequences. That, to me, is the most fun. So whenever I encounter characters, I read them with that little sense of distance, because I understand that although it's absolutely easy to say, well, why didn't Romeo check if Juliet was actually dead? Would you really do that if you were in those shoes, though? That's the thing. People can claim that, they would do things differently because they know. But, if you put yourself in those shoes and in those moments, is it really so hard to believe a character would behave in some way? Maybe, maybe not, but ultimately I think that if you're writing a story, it goes a long way to trust your characters, to follow them, see wherever they go, and the thing is this, if you write the story, and you're honest, and you make it as true as it comes to you, I think it's absolutely fine. I really do think it's fine. I know that people worry about their characters making dumb mistakes, or just mistakes in general, but you need to understand that in life, and in fiction, and in theater, and in opera, and in drama, it is from mistakes, and from lack of communication, and from errors, then that all these exciting things come from, because if everybody talked about their problems, and if everybody, went out of their way to communicate how they felt about things, there would be no problems in the world. But, once again, I digress. Allow me to summarize how I feel about things. If you are wondering about having a character in your story and keeping their name secret, simply address them by a title or a sort of nickname that you have given them through narration. And talking about narration, if you want to keep the plot twist hidden from your readers or a little bit more secret, I recommend keeping the narrator away from making absolute statements. You want to leave the leading and the assumptions to your characters, let them take center stage, and let them, if anything, confuse your reader for a bit. Let the reader make the same assumptions the characters are making and see where they go. Because, remember, characters can make mistakes. Characters can make tough choices, awful choices, do horrible things, and above all, characters can be wrong. I hope that helps, and I hope that if anything, I've given you another point of view, another perspective, another way to go about doing things. If you have thoughts of your own, or you would like to give me some sort of feedback or questions for me to answer later, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. With all of that said though, I want to thank you for watching. If you would like even more writing advice, positivity, and prompts, you can head over to my official writing blog over at maxkirin.tumblr.com. Thank you for watching, thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and I'll be seeing you soon! Mwah!